Hi, everybody. This is Heather with Leadership with Heart, the podcast. It's really the sixth time I'm speaking with someone, and I'm excited today to bring Jennifer Butler on the show. She was someone who was recommended to me by Kate Byers. And the reason why I like to get people that are recommended to me is because they're probably not going to be the people that self-nominate themselves. So leaders with heart are emotionally intelligent. They tend to be others focused. And so I decided to have Jennifer on because I wanted to hear her unique story. So it's going to be new to me as well. So Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. I'm really excited about the opportunity to speak with you today.
So tell us a little bit about you. Where are you at now in your leadership career?
Sure. So I've been working professionally for about 20 years and always in and around kind of biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. And right now I'm the head of US and chief commercial officer for a private biotechnology company with about 150 employees. I was brought in last summer to really build out their US footprint. The company to date had really been exclusively in Asia. And so this was an opportunity for me to really build something from the ground up, everything from payroll to HR policies and really building out the US team and doing it with something I'm very passionate about, which is, bringing treatments to patients. In this area, I'm working in oncology.
Oh, that's amazing work. Thank you for doing that work because it's so needed. Yeah. So, okay. So tell us a little bit about, where does your drive, your leadership drive come from? Where does some of us have a reason for, the leader we are today? We would love to hear that.
Well, sure. I mean, I think what I would say is I'm the leader I am today for hopefully being really open to being the best leader I could kind of every year over the last 20 years. I would say the leader I was, quote unquote, or the person I was, 20 years ago, not different, but I think finding the right words to actually articulate what I'm doing. I think that's kind of been maybe the journey. So when I think about what really defines me as a leader is maybe this idea of doing unto others as you would have done unto you. And when I say that, it's that I've really appreciated in my life when people have coached me as an individual. They've looked at Jen and said, what makes Jen unique and distinctive, and not really using what I would say a cookie cutter approach to, what I could be or where I could go. And maybe more importantly, the path that I need to get there. And so I think that's just been really important. I feel like I grew up in a family that, we didn't necessarily have defined roles. I don't know if that's because I grew up with all sisters, and so therefore we just got allocated the chores. So the lawn mowing was not necessarily allocated to a male in the house. And so and then I just felt like I've just taken a very individualized path. And so I think that just felt really important to me. And it took me a long time to realize that until I had a woman who worked for me who was really had done sales management, and she introduced me to an assessment tool called Strength Finders.
Oh, yeah.
And Strength Finders, I wound up, my number 2 was individualization. And I read that description, and it really resonated with me, which was that I really do seek to understand, and I just fundamentally believe in my heart of heart that there's the best version of you that's possible. And so when I'm sitting in front of you, particularly as a manager, as a direct report, because I think later I'd love to talk a little bit about what I think is the difference when you're a leader of 90, 900, and 9,000 and trying to engage at that level versus the kind of the intimacy of the responsibility as a direct manager, the kind of coaching relationship.
Yes.
And so I think that's what it is. So for me, for a long time, I tried to really define what it was in my relationship with the folks that worked most closely with me. And so it is that individualization and do unto others as you have done unto you.
And that's pretty much what your leadership style is, right? It sounds like you believe in that personalization.
Yeah, I very much do. And when, as I've had more scale and larger groups underneath me, even in those moments, I do try to get to know people individually, both what they do professionally, but I really do sincerely understand that their professional career is just a part of who they are, And so really understanding the kind of the other pieces to it. And I think the other thing that I say I've reflected on in life is that you don't know everybody's full life and full story, right? And so they sit in front of you, and you just have to kind of say, that I'm going to know them as best as I can for what they're willing to kind of share with me in that moment,
Yeah.
So, and I think that's important, right? Because that's why you have to sometimes say, like, how are you doing? When people are struggling with performance inside your company or things like that, I think the first question is they can see it too. So to have a moment of empathy and just a moment of reflection to say, hey, so I'm seeing this, like, what's going on? And and if you have that moment and you feel like you treated them like an individual, they may be able to share, and then you can coach them very specifically.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the word empathy. So when I think of leadership with heart, I think of leaders who tend to be more emotionally intelligent. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It just means that they tend to be more self-aware when maybe they've gone off track. They tend to be more empathetic and listening, maybe even aware of what's happening in the organization that they're working or just teams that they're working in, and they can kind of figure out how to maneuver through it. And so there's lots of different ways to be looking at this emotional and social intelligence realm. But I think the way you said that, you talked about individualization and personalization, and you talked about empathy, and these are some of the key things that that drive that leader with heart. So I definitely appreciate you going into detail. Can you describe for me a time when maybe you weren't that empathetic or you weren't that best leader that you could be, and then tell us how you came out of that?
I'm going to give maybe two examples, and it's funny because the when you first asked that, I think sometimes the hardest kind of folks to coach are those. If you have a high EQ and you really care about how you make people feel and your impact on people, I find that sometimes the hardest moments to coach are when you're actually coaching people who don't seem to care about how they're impacting kind of other folks. So I would say that sometimes the most kind of difficult thing, because they don't, they'll say, well, I'm achieving my goals, Jen. You told me, let's just do a sales number. I'm supposed to, reach, 100 units, just make it up. And I've reached 100 units. And then you have to say, yeah, but the rest of the team is only reaching 80 because you could have helped them more. And so you're reaching your goals, but it's not helping the collective. Well, I don't care. So I would say sometimes,
don't you love that?
Sometimes those are really, they've really definitely been some of the harder moments to coach, and really finding them to understand sometimes you almost have to personalize it for them, which is like, you're not achieving your full potential because of the way you're impacting others. So there's kind of that piece. So a lot of times I will have to take a very deep breath and engage that person, just to kind of make sure that I can try to see the world through their eyes, which is completely the antithesis of how I see the world. But I will say that bringing it back to when I think I wasn't the best leader, is a time in my career where I would say I was most insecure. And this is something I actually really fundamentally believe, which is I've looked at a lot of people, when you look at a lot of people from afar, and maybe you said, they're not being the best manager, the best leader there. So often in my life, I've reflected and said, I often think it comes from a place of fear or insecurity. And I found that to be true for me personally. About 4 years ago, I was asked to be a manager over a function I had never worked in before. So to give a little bit of background, for me, I had come from more analytics, corporate strategy, strategic marketing, very small groups, very flat organizations, kind of corporately, I'll say, in that sphere. And I was given career advice at that point that I needed some operational experience. I had not had any sales experience. I hadn't run an operations. So I was sent to, I was given an opportunity to manage a sales team. So I was a manager of managers. It was about a group of 70 folks. Okay. I was terrified. It's the first time I was being asked to lead a function that I had no technical, quote unquote, experience in. And to be fair, I'd almost I had a very untraditional approach. And I was kind of really resisting going into the position because I was like, why are you making me go back a traditional path? I've never done a traditional path. You're making me go in. I don't understand. I don't understand its purpose here, but I'm going to go do it. But I decided, okay, Jen, you're going to exude exorbitant amounts of confidence. You've got it under control, and you're going to go in and you're going to manage this group. Now, these folks they were competent. They had been doing this a long time. They knew their customers extremely well. And I was coming in from headquarters to manage a region that, by the way, I didn't even live in. I had to fly up every way. But gosh darn it, they weren't going to know that I didn't know what I was doing. Well, of course they knew I didn't know what I was doing. They read my resume. So what I thought I was doing, which was exuding extreme confidence in my competency and my ability to know what was going on, I was actually making that team almost more insecure about me, because they were like, we could help you. You know, it's so funny because you come in and you think, you know, for a while you come in with this fear of they're gonna know I don't know. Of course they do. And when you aren't authentic to saying, hey, listen, guys, you know, let me tell you what I'm good at. Right? If I had just led from the heart, which is, I really care about you as individuals, I really care about the team, and if I just led from that place and said, and I'm really here to provide support, to enable, to empower, you guys have this great thing, maybe I bring new perspectives, that would have been so much better. But instead, for 5 to 7 months, you know, I just was, and then I was hiding. You know, I wasn't engaging them as much because I thought, well, with every engagement, is going to just increase the opportunity. I'm going to fail. I'm going to say something that clearly is going to indicate. So, you know.
That's amazing. Well, it's amazing that you say that. Number one, just the hiding portion of it. It's like we're hiding from the transparency that's needed, because we have to have that transparency there, that vulnerability that has to come out for them to truly go, okay, like for them to loosen up and be like, okay, she's not going to be perfect, but we know her strengths. She really cares about us. Who cares if, you know, from this particular perspective, she doesn't know what the heck she's doing. We'll teach her that. I mean, that's okay. She'll lead us in this other more positive direction. And I think it's interesting you say that, like hiding from that, you know?
And so, and the reason I should tell the story, and you know, I know this team, if they ever hear this podcast, will know who I'm speaking of. So I'm working with them for about 6 months, and my company did a really nice thing where they would do like a leader assimilation meeting, where like after a few months they'd bring in your team and they'd have a coach and they'd sit alone with the team to get feedback, and then they'd bring the manager in, and then they would kind of blind the feedback. And I had been living in fear for 6 months of this day that was going to kind of come. I didn't realize how emotionally raw I was kind of going into this meeting. And you know, this is where they kind of said, you know, we just need Jen to give us a vision and lead us. We will follow her. It's like, we don't necessarily, you know, we know what she is, and we know her, you know, she doesn't maybe have the technical expertise on how to be most effective in sales, but if she sets a vision, we're going to follow. And that's when I began to learn the difference between the difference between being a leader and being a functional expert. And that, and it was a gift. It was hard. It was raw. I'm not going to lie to you. I had a lot of tears that day. For some reason, it really struck with me, because it was the time where I had to just, you know, be okay with, quote unquote, not, you know, I had so affiliated success with kind of achievement and competency, and it was really hard. So it was such a gift, and that team gave me that feedback, and yet they were positive, and they said we could do so much more if she just would have said, help, hey, I don't know this, can I help you? And that team, they said, we would have gotten behind you, you know, but instead you weren't telling us how we could help.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I think that's the piece. And so my takeaway there is, you know, especially when you want to really begin to accelerate your career, and you don't want to just be an individual contributor, and you really want to be scalable, is that you're going to begin to oversee functions you don't have experience with. You've got to trust in the team. You've got to be authentic, and you cannot hide. And you know what? People know it, right? That's why I said, oh, they're not going to know. Of course they knew, but it wasn't judgment. it was support.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've had to do 360 feedback at an organization, and I had never had when I had gone, I had never had 360 feedback before. So I was, of course, scared to death. And afterward, I do remember I felt like had been maybe like hit across the face a couple of times. For about 2 months, I was just it just goes through your mind, it flops up and down and around.
Hmm.
And I remember like my boss, he had given everybody super tough response and review, and I was like the best of the worst, like we were just all bad. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
And I was like, and then there's different levels in the organization that give you, there's certain cohorts that give you positive, feedback, and it's just interesting to take that all in. But it is true. We may think that we can hide from who we are and what our weaknesses are, but as leaders we can't. And in those who, like you just said, those who attempt to do that get so much less out of the team.
Hmm.
I love the fact that they are like, I'm prepared to follow, just lead, please. Love it.
Yes. No. And I was just, again, that it was an amazing team. It was a gift, and I was happy they gave it. And as hard as it was to listen, I just feel like that was a really important moment for me on just many, many levels. So.
That's awesome. Well, all the words that you used about trust and authenticity, those are just the foundations. And no matter what level you're at, you can be the CEO of a company and you could be a frontline supervisor. If you do not have trust and you are not authentic and you are not transparent, you're not going to have much success with your team. They know it, they sniff it out, right? And it's just not something you can hide. So stop it.
Yeah, and I think leading from fear and insecurity is it is not leading. I mean, I think that's an oxymoron to say, to lead with fear and insecurity. I think, it manifests itself so poorly in so many different ways. And I've seen it over the time. I mean, now overconfidence has its own, evils too, but I actually think sometimes overconfidence can be a bit of insecurity there too. But yeah, lead from a secure sense of self, and be okay with that.
I love it. Love it. And see, and I think that's, again, the self-awareness part, which is the key to emotional intelligence. You first have to be aware of your own emotions, how your emotions affect other people. And so how you've just communicated this, makes clear that that's what you do. And at least that's what you do more now, right? After many years of roles. And so here's a question. What do you do? Let's say that you're just like knee deep in projects and you have just so many things going on, even though you're at the level you are in your organization and your team is doing the same thing. They're all busy. What do you do to bring them all together? What do you do to just reconnect to your team in a more deep way?
There's a few things that I try to prioritize, and it's my one-on-ones. So what I found is that there's a lot of opportunities to do work. Right? There's usually team meetings, there'll be team emails, et cetera, et cetera. But an opportunity to really kind of connect with a person and say, how are you doing, is typically only going to really happen in those one-on-ones. And I would say that over the years, it can be the first to go when things get busy.
Yeah.
I just caution folks to recognize that. And grabbing a cup of coffee is incredibly important. And even if it is, I'm running downstairs to get a sandwich, if you want to walk downstairs with me, is incredibly important. The other thing that I've also done, and many folks who've worked for me, almost, I would say it's a signature kind of joke they say, is I'm very much focused on using videos to connect with folks. So I often have teams that don't work in my location. I've had, obviously with a regional sales director role, there were folks many, many hours away from me. I right now work for a company where my team is in Asia, and I do my one-on-ones over video. The amount of nonverbals that you need to see is pretty incredible. So that's an important thing. And I remember for some groups, they go, well, what do you mean? I go, yeah, I'm going to connect with you over video. And so that's the other thing. So again, prioritizing that one-on-one time. Doesn't always have to be a one-on-one. And for when you have disparate teams, really taking the time, whether it's literally FaceTime, it's WebEx, Zoom, and things like that, quote unquote, look the person in the eye. especially if you're not going to be traveling to them and being with them, you know, in a physical location.
Yes, I definitely can appreciate that. I 100% agree. I talk about the one-on-ones a lot in my book, and same thing as a leader. It was kind of the cornerstone of how I was able to influence my team and make sure that also that they felt like they were important. And that was such a
Mm-hmm.
key factor. And I think when you do that, when you're like, hey, come down with me and get a coffee, it says that they're important enough for you to take that 10, 15, 20, whatever it is, amount of time for you to be with them. And so I can appreciate that. And the other thing that I loved, just again, the idea about the team and what are you doing with them, but just that video chat, you know, there's nothing more important than the sensory experience. There's nothing more powerful than that sensory experience. And obviously, seeing them in person is, you know, a big priority. But if they're in Asia, it's going to be hard to do that pretty frequently. And so, you know, you doing that next best thing, they're able to see all of your micro expressions. You're able to see
Mm-hmm.
theirs. You can pick up on that. Again, there's just can't get that over just a telephone call.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, we used to joke because I also would do my team meetings when I had a completely virtual team. They'd all dial in, and I had one of my managers, and she famously had this eyebrow that was always a tell. Like whenever there was information coming up, the eyebrow, it would be like, you know, we'd say, "Oh, the eyebrow has spoken." Like, what's going on? And you could tell like something that had said either piqued her interest or she was like not agreeing with it, or you know, and so it was a great reset. You know, I've had a lot of folks I work with who cannot play poker. They can play poker if I can't see them, but once I can see them, you know, it's impossible for them to hide their emotions, and so it really does help. But I have someone on my team right now who has a similar thing. It's, you know, very hard to, she cannot play poker with me if we're on the WebEx
Well,
or
I
on a
love
video chat.
I love that. I love it. Again, this is that whole social intelligence part
Mm-hmm.
of the, you know, Daniel Goleman's model, where you look at how you're not only just empathetic to people, but how you're really aware of what their feelings might be. You're paying attention to the nuances, and you get to see the eyebrow up, and you're like, okay, let's take a pause. See, there could be an issue here, and then you're able to kind of go further with it.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of like letting, you know, conflict or something that happens and it's underneath the surface, you're just kind of bringing that right up to the top
Mm-hmm.
and being again leading with heart, because leading with heart does not always mean you're, you know, touchy feely, you know, butterflies and birds chirping. The leader with heart is also someone who's willing to bring conflict to the surface, to, you know, to make sure that that gets out of the way and that you can kind of move past some of that pain that's there before you know, go and take the next step. So
Mm.
again, I just think it's amazing that, you know, what you're bringing forward to the teams that you're leading. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you do? What would you say, you know, the one last thing you would say to a leader, you know, whether they're early, mid, or kind of, you know, like you've 20, 30 years as a leader, what would you say is kind of the most important thing, the one thing that, you know, if they're struggling with it, you know, what piece of advice would you do to give to these leaders who might be listening right now?
Well, you know, I think in some ways, you know, be a student of leadership and management. I mean, I would say I feel like every, you know, if you're listening and you're open to it, you know, there's always some lesson or kind of learning to be out there. And I think it's also just important to not always point the finger out. You know, we always say when you point a finger out, there's usually three fingers pointing back at you. So you know, that kind of thing. And so you do have to kind of own it. I think the other thing too is early in my career I thought I didn't have to find the words. I didn't have to tell people how I wanted to lead. And I think that's the other thing too, which is I do try to share my goals and my ambitions. I also try to communicate as often as possible. This idea that they're just going to quote unquote see how I do it and understand what I'm doing is, I just found, you know, it's not really going to be effective. You have to state it, you have to communicate it, you have to reiterate it, because people have to understand not only the corporate where you're going, but also kind of, you know, what are your kind of philosophies, you know, like when I do goal objectives with my team, I've just been very clear that, you know, we're going to have a conversation not only about what you did, but by the manner by which you did it. And so, you know, this year, my company,
Oh, I love that.
the company values are actually embedded in it. And this is about, you know, finding new solutions. It's about how you've interacted with team members. And that's the other thing too, now in the company I'm working with, which has been particularly, I think, important to me, which is values are the how. right? Objectives or the KPIs or whatever metrics any company wants to call it.
Yes.
And to me as a leader, I tell people, I will hold you accountable to both those things. And it actually allows you sometimes, because the most difficult conversation managers and leaders have sometimes is the how in which somebody is getting something done. It's also how you can run amok with ethical and just diversity issues and things like that. So if you say up front, I'm going to hold you accountable to that, it makes the difficult conversation easier later on. So those are some of the kind of the things.
That's great stuff. Hopefully everybody was listening very closely and taking notes on that. That was really good. I will be obviously doing show notes that will be summarizing a lot of these key points that Jennifer's made, which I think are just golden and fit completely into the Leadership with Heart podcast. So thank you, Kate Byers, for doing that and referring her, because she's amazing. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you as a follow-up, they have a question based upon something you've said, how would you want for them to get a hold of you?
Sure. They can find me on LinkedIn. So it's Jennifer R. Butler. And they can find me there and connect me through LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty disciplined about that. If that should usually be a pretty good way to find me. And I currently work at a company called Tessa, Tessa. And they can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And what I'll do is in the show notes, I'll make sure you'll have, the little bio more about Jennifer, and also the way you can contact her. You'll be able to find that in the show notes later on as well. Jennifer, this has been amazing. I mean, extremely enlightening. I learned some new things for sure. I love that last thing about, the manner by which you do it. The way you said that, it was like, and to be very clear with that, because again, that's still leadership with heart. It may seem to some maybe, unemotional or detached. I think the very opposite. I think setting the expectations and having that clarity is what engages that relationship and connects them closer. So kudos to you. It's amazing. Thank you so much for joining and giving us all this great advice and tips.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. And I really just appreciate that you're creating this forum for this discussion. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.